All right. Well, welcome everybody to Virginia Cannabis webinar. I'm Eric Postow. I'm a Virginia attorney focused on cannabis. I'm with Parlatory Law Group. We're a cloud-based law firm that's nationwide. With me today is Ellis Smith, founder of American Cannabis Company, and we're being hosted by our friends at Cannabis Tech. Ellis, thanks for being with me today.
Eric, thanks for having me. Super excited to be on.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of really exciting things going on in Virginia. As you know, we just became the first southern state to go fully adult use recreational. Our markets are going to come online no earlier than 2024 at this point, with applications for licensing starting in July 1, 2023. July 1st this year, we are legalizing possession up to 1 ounce per person and up to 4 plants per household. You have to be 21 or older. You cannot buy retail marijuana. We already have an existing medicinal marijuana regime in place right now. But for folks who are more on the recreational side, you can start using and consuming legally this year. Just kind of starting out, if we're thinking about an emerging market, what are you feeling coming from the markets that you've been in, specifically Colorado? What are you thinking that Virginia's bringing to the table that's going to be unique just from your perspective?
Well, one, I think just to allow home growing 3 years before the actual true rat race starts, with all of the big spending happening and the whole regulatory framework falling in place from that side, I think that's pretty interesting to see. This is going to open up a lot of opportunity for folks to be able to grow at home and take care of their medical needs as well as their personal needs outside of being, a medical market now. And so I think that's pretty interesting and fascinating. I think their numbers are a little bit low, and they think that their first couple of years will be at about half a billion dollars in revenue. I think it's going to be quite a bit higher than that, just because of the states surrounding you, and there's quite a bit of density and population that you're going to be able to pull probably quite a bit more revenue, I think, a lot faster. I think it's going to be a generous market with as many licenses that they're going to be allowing, up to 450 cultivators. I think that's pretty exciting to see that many folks can get in and grow the plant. And so, yeah, I think it's poised to really allow social equity folks to play in the space. It's not too competitive where, some small players with small budgets can't come in and play. With the ability to give out that many licenses, I think that just encourages a more of a free market mindset, and allowing some small players, big players, and a little bit of everybody to come in and see how they can pave their way and create a sustainable business model. So I think it's pretty exciting. I think it's pretty neat. I'm from the South. I'm from Alabama. It's neat to see Virginia kind of pushing this forward, as we need to see more southern states doing this. And so I'm glad to see the race is on.
You mentioned something about licensing. 450 cultivation, 400 retail, 60 manufacturing, and 25 wholesalers. From what you know of other markets, where does that place us in a competitive scheme? Do we have more license opportunities, less? And what's the main difference between kind of a fully open-ended free market versus a more regulated, capped market like Virginia is going to be?
Yeah, to see that there's more cultivators in retail stores, that's a little bit lopsided in my eyes, but hey, that's just the way they kind of laid this out, and so I'm curious to see how this unfolds. 25 wholesalers, I'm curious to know what that means. If that means that they're going to be kind of a middleman, and they're going to be the ones supporting, a lot of these 450 cultivators that will need to distribute a lot of this excess product. Obviously, they're going to be having. So I'm really curious to learn a little bit more about the product in that standpoint. But yeah, it's an interesting twist on how we've seen some markets open up, and so I'm curious to see how this, once again, incubated market really proves that it can do it in its own way. I think the numbers are a little lopsided, but I'm curious to see how it unfolds.
And we may see some changes. Virginia built into its law the need to reenact by the 2022 legislature. So our elections coming up this fall are important. We also have a regulatory control, or the Cannabis Control Authority, which is standing up this year, is not even going to put out regulations until at least 2022. So at least a year from now, before we even get an inclination. JLARC, that put together the studies before the law was passed, and now after the law is passed, has identified some areas that are just interesting to watch and made some more recommendations. particularly looking at some of the opportunities for the medicinal side, the bigger companies, multi-state operators, to get involved with multiple licensing opportunities. I think it was 6 per medical license, and we have 5. So that could be 30 retail operations that's going to the big players. When we think about an emerging cannabis market in light of social equity opportunities, in light of Virginia specifying the desire to have small businesses at the forefront of this, do you think there's any trouble ahead, or is this something that needs to be looked at closely? What is the role of the MSO in relation to the local business operators?
Well, it's great to see that the state has really kind of limited how these licenses are distributed out and who can come into the space and play. It's interesting to watch them play. Once again, it's a kind of an incubator to watch how this can unfold. The whole social equity programs across the U.S. are starting to really become more prevalent. We haven't seen a lot of them in the past, and so this is a great way to really instill that the people of Virginia can come in and have an opportunity to function and operate in this space, which is normally dominated by a lot of big budget multi-state operators that come in. And so to me, it's great to see that they want to protect the people and that opportunity is going to be there. The MSOs do play a role. They're the ones that are going to help get the program started immediately. They'll be the ones that can immediately open dispensary doors and start selling product while the rest of the market catches up and gets through their build out and gets product available in the supply chain. And so they do play that role to get product into the marketplace pretty quickly as they can transfer their current space into cultivating both medical and recreation at the same time. And so there is a need and role for that. But I think it's great that the state is allowing these small businesses to really come in and have a foothold, and they're protecting them from these big players. You don't see that all the time in these states. Colorado did a great job of doing that up until 2020. They allowed outside investment or ownership from multi-state operators to come in, and that I think that was good for our state to really figure things out over about 10 years before that happened. And so I think it's a good model. And I'm excited to see once again how this incubator project kind of works. It's very different.
Yeah, and I want to return to lessons learned from Colorado and some other markets. As we're thinking about those local businesses, which is mostly my practice, supporting small businesses that want to get into the space. I'm advising clients now on how to establish branding, marketing, going after domain names, really thinking about what do you want your company to be. Corporate structures, is it better to be an LLC or a C Corp or maybe an S Corp down the line? As we're thinking about the small players mainly, local mom and pops, the most important thing is probably going to be capitalization. What's your thoughts on how much capital should go into the project? What do you need to bring to the table? And then also, what kind of team should you be putting together, and how soon should you be doing that? As we're getting involved. I know that was a lot, so we can break it down as you need.
Sure. So from a team standpoint, I think we'll start there and then we'll go into budget. But from the team standpoint, it's very important to really understand, who is going to be working day to day in the business. Are your team members going to be just investors into the business? What kind of role are they going to play in the application itself and supporting documents and with the whole vision of the company? There's a lot of things you need to understand, how your team gets built. Obviously, you want to convey to the state that you're well capitalized, that you have a team and the wherewithal to come in and take that license and get it functioning and operational. And at the end of the day, prove to the state that you can generate tax revenue for them. And that's what they want to see, that you can get executed, bring the product to market as the people of Virginia have voted for, and not miss a beat. And so when you go to look at how you build this team, it's very important that you align yourself with the right strategic players, because this is what can really tell a compelling story in your application and prove to the state that you really are viable for that license and can continue to put tax revenue into that state's hands. And that's what they're really looking at. And so make sure you select that very, very cautiously, but you do it the right way and choose the right folks. And then we'll go to the budget side here. The budget's very tricky. It can be very expensive to build out cultivation facilities and extraction facilities, and dispensaries are really kind of your line of least resistance with the lowest capital expenditure to really get into the space. You can imagine you can spend anywhere from I'll say $150,000 to up to $1 million to open up a dispensary. And depending on a lease, you're probably going to find something anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 square foot, and you're probably going to spend anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 a month, depending on the location, where all of these different things will add into that price point. But you also want to understand your build out and how much money do you want to put into this thing, from your display cases to the overall customer experience. You obviously have the regulatory compliance aspect from the cameras, how you intake product, how you understand your product inventory at night whenever you close down, your reconciliation, all of these things. And so I've seen people open dispensaries in some markets for as low as $150,000 to build it all out with a CapEx and still have an OpEx to run the business for 6 months. And depending on your budget and what you want, you may want to spend $1 million on the build out and make it look like an Apple store, or make it very complex with the interior scapes and how it looks. That's really up to you. But I feel a really good number in Virginia can be anywhere from about $150,000 to $500,000 to really get that operational dispensary going. Cultivation is a whole other animal, and this is where we want to understand what type of demand we're going to see in your state. There will be some questions in this that the state will require or ask on what type of facility you want to build out, and you're going to need to prove to them that you're not going to overbuild a million square foot of grow space for the state when there's no way you could ever sell it all, and they're probably not going to give a license to somebody going to do something that's 2,500 square foot in canopy. And so we want to understand how you can be one of those 450 cultivators that's going to meet the specific demand that's going to be out in the marketplace, which we can find some really great numbers to help pull that information to tell the state that we're going to build X amount of square foot to be part of this 450 overall cultivators in the market, and we plan to support this segment of that demand. And this is what it really boils down to. But you can imagine a cultivation facility has a lot of technology in it. It's very, very expensive to build out. You can look to anywhere to spend $150 to upwards of $400 a square foot to build out a cultivation facility. And your sweet spot with this many cultivators is probably going to be about 10,000 square foot to 20,000 square foot facilities. And so you can do the math there on what they can look like, anywhere from $1.5 million to upwards to $10 million plus, depending on how big you want to go. And then extraction facilities, which is another unique way to get into the space. 60 manufacturers. This is a great little model, I think, in that number that they're limiting, so that they can definitely support these 450 growers. And those facilities you can build out for anywhere from about $750 to about $1.5 million, depending on what type of extraction you want to do, from CO2 to butane to ethanol, or even non-volatile extraction from rosin pressing to traditional keefing and these types of things. So from a budget standpoint, those are some high-level numbers that just for you to think about and resonate on what it can look like to start one of these businesses. What kind of questions do you have after that, Eric? I kind of went long-winded on that.
No, that was good. I'll just kind of use that to kind of maneuver. One of the things we see in Virginia's law is the allowance for vertical integration. The law doesn't require vertical integration, which some other markets do. Florida comes to mind as something that requires fully vertically integrated cannabis businesses. If we're thinking about different models, do you think Virginia is more competitive by allowing for vertical integration but not forcing it? What do you think the main benefits and drawbacks to the different models are?
Yeah, we saw this in Colorado, where in our medical market specifically, you had to be vertical initially, and then they changed that over time and really allowed wholesale production to come into the medical space. But that really took almost 8 or 9 years to happen. And so I'll be curious to see how this unfolds in your market. I think it allows some protection, and it really allows for more of a free market. These folks that are vertical, they can really control their supply chain, and it's a great model. I'm a vertical operator as well, and I like being able to control my supply chain. I hate having to go to the wholesale market because it's not always consistent. And so these the operators that aren't vertical, they'll have to now deal with that supply demand aspect in the market and lack of consistency that we see in cannabis. And so there's some advantages to playing in both, I'll say. And so it'll be curious to see how this ratio, what they're allowing, kind of how it supports the market. End of the day, that's the goal, is how do we get product in the hands of the customer? I mean, that's the biggest thing consistently.
Absolutely. And from what I'm seeing, it feels like if you're thinking about from a growing and selling perspective, The cultivator and the manufacturing license could very well go hand in hand, especially with that more competitive 60 license cap for manufacturers. You can have 450 cultivators, but if only 60 of them are also manufacturing, probably less because you'll probably have specialized manufacturers that aren't cultivators, I think that gives a competitive advantage to those players. Moving forward in Virginia, so it's very clear that we have some regulatory question marks. The Cannabis Control Authority stands up July 1 this year. They have such a huge lane on which to carve out the real regulations. The laws create a very basic framework, but our regulations are going to be the thing that spells out how are we doing this. Questions that come to mind, especially from other places, canopy control. Are they going to limit canopy to a certain square footage? Are they going to limit THC? What happens in your mind and from your experience when markets create the legalized market, but then limit THC to a certain percent or limit canopy growth? What happens in that market when regulations like that come into play?
It really forces the market to go to the black market, and with your allowing home growing to happen, this is where it's a crossroad. You know, it really is. I hate to say that, but this is what happens. Is they're going to turn to an alternative and go that route because it can be easier. And you guys are creating a unique opportunity for folks to grow at home. 2 years, 3 years before this market really takes off, and so you're going to be dealing with that as a reality as a state to now compete with that. This is what Colorado has done, and I will tell you, we watched the evolution in our state come in and start to tighten the control of how the home growing happens in our state, from people being caregivers and being able to grow for 5 patients in their houses, or in even warehouses they were renting legally, and they really limited and changed that because it started to become an issue. And so I think that's a real reality that sometimes we don't want to point out, but just from my experience, I've got to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, because I think that's a conversation that also has to be looked at, because this is the reality, is it will create a big black market there.
Absolutely, and I think JLARC was pointing that out themselves in their recent publication. And I think there's still time. There are going to be open hearings before the Cannabis Control Authority, and I'm hopeful that the community input can effectuate our regulations in a way that makes sense. We want a thriving market. We want good control, safety regulations in place. We want people to have access. I'm not personally opposed to home grow at all, but what we do want is we do want to have a thriving and healthy economy that creates jobs, that leads to opportunities, that adds tax dollars and revenues to the state. So I think your point is well taken. On that note, what Virginia does that's different than other states. So there's two things. There's Dillon rule and there's home rule. This is a legal concept. What it really means is that in Virginia, when the legislative body, the legislators put forth that law, that's really going to be the law. In other states, like New Jersey, for example, the local jurisdictions have a lot more ability to control the regulations and regulate themselves or prohibit completely. Virginia has a limited way of doing that by putting it on the ballot, but not a very comprehensive scheme for localities to restrict. What they can do is add 3% on top of the 21% sales tax statewide. If you're thinking about a competitive market, what is if I'm a locality and I'm making a decision right now, do we want that 3% tax or we don't? What do you think the competitive advantage to attracting businesses are with the taxing regime? And then if you can talk to the states where the localities are also regulators, unlike what Virginia will be, do you think that puts us in a more competitive position?
Yeah, I think the 3%, we've seen this quite a bit in many markets. Massachusetts, for one, they allow up to 3%, and some of these towns push the 3 all the way every time, which they should. Why not? But what they allow to Massachusetts, for instance, is that some towns can opt in or out. Now, Virginia sounds like they're limiting that, and I think this is great. Let these businesses come in and thrive. Take the tax money. Call it a sin tax, whatever you want. we're able to do this business legally now in 2021, or at this point 2024. Pay the tax and let's get on with it. Let's forget about this and understand there's a bigger picture here of getting just product in the hands of the consumer, whether for medical use or personal use. And I think it's a great advantage for these towns to open their doors and say, come on in. We welcome this into our community. We're going to lower it to 1%, or some communities say we're not going to even take that percentage. We do see that sometimes. And so I think it does allow for some competitiveness around your state for communities to welcome it with open arms and accept it and understand the reality behind cannabis and know that they can control it with the regulation that's being created. And the other ones, they'll use that against the market to say, we're going to use the 3% tax, we're going to limit where our green zones are in our town, and you're going to have a hard time finding space that's going to meet our expectations. And so I think it's from a state's perspective, I think it's great and competitive because we see this in other markets happening. And yeah, I think it's just going to allow some towns to really become, we'll call it green hubs. They'll be central to this cannabis game, and good for them to take it on with open arms and bring in the tax revenue. And other ones will use it to kind of oppose it. So I think it's you'll see how it's leveraged in two different ways.
So in JLARC's new presentation, they recommend speeding up or accelerating the licensing application process to January 2023 to start the applications versus July, 6 months. How long does it take normally in the markets you know about from application approval to operation? And do you think that our regulations should embrace what JLARC recommends of accelerating that timeline by 6 months?
They have to accelerate it because you can imagine from the time of application to the time the true first revenue can be made, you're almost 18 to 2 years out. And so you can imagine they give the application process in July, they have to award them by January 1 of 2024 to get the program started. Okay, so now we have to start construction. You'll see a lot of bold players will probably pre-build. We see people spend big dollars and sometimes they lose after building these facilities. So that will happen. But if people follow the trend and don't do that until they have the paper in hand, construction, you can do it depending on your jurisdiction and building departments that you're working with. I've built a greenhouse in Minnesota one time in 90 days. This was before the application was even won, but we wanted to prove to the state we were ready to operate. It was a bold move and it worked for them very well, but that's not normal for most people. So you're looking at a 6 month to a 1 year time to build out a facility. Luckily, these folks will probably go through all their design work pre-application because they'll have to. Some of these folks will pay for mechanical, electrical, plumbing. They'll get stamp drawings. They'll be prepped and ready in anticipation of winning that license. That'll give them a leg up. But for the most part, you're 6 months to a year before you can actually put a single plant in the ground. Then you have to put the plant in the ground, and you can you can grow your plants in a short cycle, your first round, to get product in the market, but that still will take you probably 4 months. And so you can see this adds up very fast to, July to January, there's a 6 months right there to get the applications approved. Then you've got another 6 months to a year to build out, and then another 4 to 5 months for production. And so you can see this timeline can take quite a bit of time. And so I think if you can get this thing started in January of 23, it's going to be huge to help this process. But once again, they have to award it in July so that these folks can start construction, so that hopefully by that January 24, they can start selling product per the rules and regs. Is that right? They can start selling it on that date, or they can start the program?
Well, they could start selling at January 1, 2024, but like you're saying, that might be impossible.
So I think the better they can start the program and get the licenses awarded, and at least know that operators have a chance to get billed out by that, by that January 24, whatever you can do to expedite it, because it is a long time. I mean, it's crazy to see that it was awarded this year, and we've got 3.5 more years to go before we see this program enacted and really seeing product. Really 4.5 years, I'll call it. It's a long ways out, and so anything we can do to expedite it, it's just going to benefit the tax dollars being generated. That's what the government wants at the end of the day. So it's a faster way to get there. The sooner we can do it.
I want to pivot a little bit to kind of focus on who some of the applicants might be that we can know about now. In particular, focusing on social equity. I think over the last decade, and seriously in the last year or two, we've seen much more momentum behind the social equity application process in cannabis, where states are looking to undo past harmful, prohibitive measures by the state in over-policing people who have been incarcerated or face conviction for marijuana related charges. In Virginia, our social equity position right now focuses on a few different areas. One, if you have a certain marijuana conviction misdemeanor, or a family member has a Virginia marijuana conviction misdemeanor, if you've come from an area that's been over-policed, which we need to understand what areas those are, the Cannabis Control Authority is going to have the cog on that. They're the ones that are going to tell us what areas have been over-policed. Economically distressed areas, and again, the agency responsible for the regulations are going to be the ones that put that out. So we really don't know exactly. We can guess on some of those things. And then if you've graduated from a historically black college or university in Virginia, JLR pointed out recently that this might be overly broad for social equity. What the goals really should be trying to support those who have been disproportionately negatively impacted by prohibition, but not just open it up so much so that you have hundreds of thousands of potential applicants under the social equity regime. First off, what's your take on how social equity has emerged as a dominant factor in cannabis industries, and what do you think about what JLARC is saying about an overly broad one, and should it be a little bit more tailored to support people who have actually been negatively impacted?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, we need this in our industry. And our industry is white men like myself. I'm guilty of it, and it's very prevalent, and we can't deny that. You just don't see a lot of people of color in our sector. And so I'm not as familiar with as in depth of the program that you have in Virginia. But at the end of the day, we need to open up these opportunities and provide folks that have been not as fortunate to get into the space and give them every opportunity to do that. And I think in some people's eyes, they may think it's broad and too much. I don't think it is. I think we need to give them every opportunity that they can to come into our space. It is just the bottom line. You look at who our industry is, and we need to change that. And we need to have a different perspective on who our industry is now coming into this. And a lot of these folks have been impacted by the war on drugs, whether their family, whether themselves, and they deserve that right. A lot of states kind of neglected that. They penalized you if you were a part of that whole war on drugs, and I love to see this shift from the way it was initially when this industry started, because they didn't want any bad actors coming in. Now they're like, you were a part of that program that we know we targeted you and you were treated misfairly. We want to give you that chance to come back and now work in a space that probably you have passion for and an interest in, and you probably do very well in. And so it's a double-edged sword, but I support it so much. As just, you go to trade shows and there's a lack of diversity, and it's very evident. And so I'm in strong support behind this so much.
Absolutely. As you're seeing social equity programs come online, are you feeling more positive that change is occurring? And in states that have embraced it fully, are you starting to see diversity in the industry like you'd want?
I'm not. I will tell you, I just don't speak to a lot of diverse clientele. I really don't. A lot of the clients calling me are rich white men that are coming into the space. I do have some diverse clientele, a few that call and reach out and have a lot of questions. But I feel like when you start discussing consulting fees and these things, I think they're not prepared to understand that there's a huge upfront cost that comes with getting this license in your hand, and a lot of folks aren't prepared for that. And I think we need to look just beyond saying, hey, we're going to allow these folks to come into our space. Is there a way to give them some financial support or create programs to work with consultants like myself that we will do some work for these programs and donate and give? We're kind of looking to do that right now in the Denver market, where they have a social equity program. And so I think there needs to be more for this group we're trying to support. It's one thing for them to come in here, but how do they afford $50,000 to $100,000 pre-application fees to hire a consultant to do your business plan, your financial model, to help you do your design work? Most of these folks from middle class or lower class that are qualifying for this, and how do they have the resource and network to go sit down with folks that can write a check and do these kinds of things? And so I think there's a big disconnect. I have seen in Detroit how they earmarked I think a couple $1 million to help with that in their community specifically, and I think more of that needs to happen.
In Virginia, what we're looking at for social equity, one, we're looking at expungement, a process to get the records of folks who have those certain marijuana convictions off their record, to give them a clean start. We're looking at grants programs, apprenticeship programs, zero or low interest loans for qualified applicants. So it looks like Virginia's law is trying to come to the similar conclusions that you just spoke to. How do we get folks involved who otherwise might be left out of the market? Which brings up a really interesting point. As I've been growing my focus on this space nationwide, talking to various people, I'm learning about the differences in opinions from legacy and corporate cannabis. There's a lot of mistrust between folks who have been in this industry long before it was legal and who want to participate now, who were shut out, as you said, early on in some of the other markets. Where do you think the role of the legacy industry practitioner is today? And how can we make sure that we don't bypass the group of people who really took the largest risks within this space?
I think your state did a great job with that by really focusing on the small business, limiting the MSOs and what they can come in and do. And it gives that free market opportunity for the folks like myself. I come from the black market. I spent a lot of time doing that before I got into regulated cannabis. And there is a way for us to come into some markets. I'm grateful that I was able to cross over that leg and get into regulated and kind of look back behind me and say, okay, I do have a misdemeanor. I'm not afraid to admit that. I'm a businessman and I'm part of that counterculture. And a lot of folks out there who want that change and shift in their life as well. And I think your market really opens it up for them to do that. Gives them really a chance to take that step over from one fence to the other and get into a whole different pasture and try something new and have an outlet to do it and know that they're going to be protected from your state to let them do that and know that the big guys aren't going to come push them out. So I think your state did a great job of doing that. California has done a great job with it as well. Not all markets are like that. I mean, look at Florida. They gave out 5 licenses initially. If you weren't supported by multi-billion-dollar, guys that come in and really understand the expense of getting into this, you can't compete. And so you see the dynamics and the differences. So in your market specifically, you guys did a great job for that. And so all of you backwoods Virginia growers that are ready to do this legally, now's your chance. Get prepared. I mean, make sure that you get your taxes caught up. You get all your things in line so that you can do this. And I'm speaking, very passionately to you about this because this is your shot. This is your opportunity. And your state is really looking at folks like yourself, even though you may not feel like it, to really come out of these basements, out of the Appalachian back hills where you're growing it and to do it legitimately. And so get ready. Now's your shot. And I encourage you guys to take that step because I did it. A lot of people have done it. And man, I'm so grateful for it. And I think you guys would be too. So get ready. And your state has set you up for it.
Yeah, I think one point that can't be overstated is who are the experienced cannabis people, if not the legacy folks, right? And so when we're looking at a competitive licensing process, we're looking at people who have zero experience altogether and maybe have an interest in it versus an experienced team that understands the plant, understands how to create a product, understands how to get it to market it, and all these things. I certainly think that within all legalized markets, there is a very important role for the legacy participants to share that knowledge and to come be a part of our legitimized market. We really need, I think it's important in our law to focus on the elimination of the black market as much as possible. But that will never happen if there's no trust between those legacy folks and the state. So I'm glad to hear that you're seeing within our law that there's opportunities for those types of participants to bring their experience and make a useful product that people want. So appreciate your thoughts on that.
Absolutely.
Last couple of things. One thing that the industry at large is hampered by is the lack of banking support. Right now, as everyone knows, marijuana is still federally illegal. It's a Schedule I narcotic. The winds are seemingly starting to shift on that. However, banks are not shifting in the large enough numbers to really make a major impact nationwide. Some banks have. Virginia, within its law, created safe banking language, which really tells those financial institutions from the state side, we're not going to come after you for providing banking services to cannabis plant touching businesses. But a lot of federally chartered banks are not doing that. What are you seeing out there in the banking space? How important is it to have a banking partner? And what should companies thinking about getting involved now, small cannabis businesses that want to participate, how should they plan for less opportunity for banking and the cash side of that, the dangers that come with cash businesses, especially in the numbers that we're talking about with cannabis?
Well, I will say, in the past, banking was a challenge, and these were mostly cash-run businesses. The last, call it 2 years, we've really seen a big shift and seeing a lot of different services coming in, and it's all state by state on how it functions in that way. For the most part, banking is now really kind of coming front and center and kind of supporting markets for the most part. A lot of small mom and pops are still running cash businesses, but most markets have banking, and it's really changing dynamically. We're starting to see some of the bigger players that have really shut it down in the past starting to dabble their toes in it even more. And so I think by the time your market does come online in 2024, there will be zero questions behind the banking side because it is so far out. I say that only now because right now I'm living in a space where banking is not an issue or problem anymore like it has been. And so I'm very confident and comfortable that by then our federal government should have pulled their head out of their you-know-what and figured something out for us. If not, I'm still confident in the current programs and systems that we are using, from trust banks to state banks to other services that are out there, that they'll be able to support this. And so I'm not going to name off any names we work with, but I know a group that's based out of the South, and they work all over the central north to East Coast to all over the West here, and so they could easily come in and fulfill that need as well in your market. And so I'm not concerned about that with your market, just knowing we have such a long road ahead of us before we get there.
Well, I think you'd probably agree. I mean, I'm talking to banks across the state right now just to gauge their interest, to provide them opportunities for education. It's going to be first come, best served, I would imagine. It's just like any other participant. Banks are going to have a limited opportunity to be a part of that front wave emerging market. So I'm hopeful that, like you're seeing in other places, that banks in Virginia will understand that this is a legitimate market, that it needs to be serviced appropriately and properly, and that there will be some front runners for that, so that we can have a functioning market. Because without banking, it will be problematic. And I'm glad to hear that you're seeing changes coming down the pipe.
For sure. So I think by the time your market turns on, we won't have any concerns. I think a lot of the banks in your state will be ready to accept it.
So we've talked about plant touching businesses, the licensing and the like, and we've sort of touched on it with banks. I want to know your perspective on the opportunities for ancillary businesses, those folks that aren't touching the plant but are servicing the industry. What are you seeing out there? What do you know? What do you expect And for people that don't want to be involved necessarily on the plant touching side, what opportunities might they have to be involved in the industry at large?
Man, you bet. And there's so much to play in that side, from mechanical, electrical, plumbing services, all those specialty services, architects. You've got grow stores. You've got accounting services. You've got every type of trade for construction. From you name it, from your drywall folks to their people putting in your studs to everybody doing the roofing. There's a whole slew of things.
And these are specialized construction, correct?
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So folks that maybe have been doing pharmaceutical design and build, that type of stuff, laboratory design and build. There's so many diverse ways to look at this space and really figure out a niche to come in here. So if you're in a different sector and you have an interest in cannabis, more than likely your sector can play a role in cannabis. Whether you're an IT person and you want to bring your expertise in programming or web design and graphic, there's all of these different crossovers into our sector. And so treat cannabis like any other business market and figure out how your services that you currently are supporting can come into cannabis. And if you have any questions around that, reach out to myself and Eric. See how we can help guide you, because you may have some unique proprietary stuff that you do in graphic design that is new that we need to see, and cannabis can explode with it. Who knows? And so it's so open-ended, and a lot of people have made significant money and livings off of supporting cannabis. You've heard that old saying that the guy who made the money off of the miners was the guy selling the picks and the shovels. Well, it's the same thing. There's a lot of opportunity selling picks and shovels and all those ancillary sides of the business. And so just figure out your niche, as there's so many different ways to support this. I mean, there's 450 cultivators. That's 450 construction projects. 400 dispensaries. That's 400 construction projects that all come along with so many different other ancillary needs. And so it's there, especially in your own backyard if you're in Virginia listening.
Not to mention the insurance providers.
That's a big one. We need that for sure. That's a big one. I mean, lawyers, just like you. I mean, you got to pay legal. All of this, you need all these resources to really be successful. And I know it may sound daunting and expensive, but that's where putting together the right budgets and understanding your cost of play in this space is super important, because you don't want to show up with not enough money and then fall flat on your face and then your dream goes away. And so plan accordingly. I can't stress that enough.
So then, in conclusion, what would you say are the 3 things that you would advise someone thinking about going for one of the licenses now, or someone who wants to participate in an ancillary business? What are 3 things that you would tell them?
Oh man, first understand, what direction do you want to go in? Like you said, do you want to be a plant touching? Do you want to do extraction? Do you want to do dispensary? Do you want to be on the sidelines supporting the industry from what your core business is already? You got to look in the mirror and identify that first and foremost. Figure that out and understand and outline what that can look like to either own a license or to support the business from the ancillary side. 2, then looking at your execution. Once you decide an ancillary business or actually owning a license, who are your team members? Who are they going to be, and how do you show up and perform in this space? Whether you're going to provide web work to the industry or you're going to own a license and come and apply for a license. Who's that team? Who are you going to work with? And then the last one is, how do you plan on financially supporting this vision? Whether you're going to penetrate the cannabis industry with your ancillary business, how are you going to market and promote your service to us? Or if you are planning on going at a license, you better do the work to understand the cost to get into this, because it's not just the capital expense, it's the operational expense as well. And really outlining that and starting to have these conversations way early on and having those tools available to present to your investors or your family and friends you're getting money from. Those are the 3 things that are really going to help get you ready to come into the cannabis space in Virginia.
Alice, thank you so much for being with me today. We're going to open up the floor to some questions from the audience. We're happy to take your questions, and hopefully we can provide you with some good insight and resources for how to move forward.
Thanks, everybody, for joining in today. I really appreciate you tuning in to hear our message today about Virginia cannabis. We're going to dive into some question and answers here with Eric and myself. And the first question is, Eric, if you can help me answer this, what will it take to make Virginia's social equity program successful?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Look, when Virginia put out its law, what they really focused on first, I think, was the social equity side. We saw that in the expungement opportunities that are written in there down the line. We see that with who they're targeting for social equity applicants and how they're going to benefit them. So if we think about the assistance programs, loans, the preferences for licenses, kind of ahead of the line for folks that are early on applicants, for those zero or no interest loans, I think that's really a great starting point. What we need to do right now, the folks on the ground in Virginia who are watching this stuff, paying attention, who think they have an interest, we need to share our knowledge. We need to spread the word. We need to look at the HBCUs. We need to be reaching out to the folks at Norfolk State, Hampton University, Virginia State, Virginia Union University, Virginia College of Lynchburg, and talk about educating graduates coming out of that. The universities ought to be looking at programs like what Michigan State has and University of Maryland that are educating people on the science behind cannabis so that we can start creating an educated class of graduates to work in this industry. This industry, cannabis, as you know, Ellis, requires a lot of know-how on the growing and the manufacturing side. It's basically scientists with extraction and creating different types of products. So I think we need to be speaking about it. We need to be making sure folks who are interested or don't know about this get word. And we need to be working with our HBCUs in particular, since their graduates stand to benefit about programs that may help them move into this type of industry.
I appreciate that. That's a great answer. And this is going to be front and center for your state, and so we really need to tackle this and make sure that we support the social equity program and really give everyone a clear opportunity to get into the space. And so thank you for that answer. I have another question that came in on how many license categories are there, and what are the categories?
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit today, but it's worth reiterating. We have 450 cultivation. These are the caps. 400 retail. Those are your stores, your storefronts. 60 manufacturing. Those are the folks who are taking the raw cannabis product and turning it into a product, the extractors and creating edibles and oils and tinctures and all that stuff. And then 25 wholesalers. So we've got an interesting mix there, but there's going to be other types of opportunities that aren't even in the cap. Within the law, there's required to be secure transportation. So folks who are in the trucking, transport industry may want to be paying attention to what are the requirements to be a secured transport to do that logistics. And there's also testing. So some of those labs out there, people who are in the sciences who want to be a part of the industry can look at what it takes to set up a testing lab because that's going to be an important requirement as well.
Agreed. Is a licensee allowed to sell their license?
No, a licensee is not allowed to sell their license. So what can happen? A business owner can sell their business, and the state may grant a temporary or interim license just so that transaction can occur. But that group of people or that person is going to have to go through the licensing application process just like everybody else. So it isn't like a medallion. Someone asked me, is this like a taxi cab medallion in New York where I can get the medallion and sell it to someone else? No, you can't do it like that. But there are creative ways when you're selling a business to look at it, but in a direct transfer, you cannot just transfer that license to someone else.
Do you know there's a term limit like we see in some states that you may have to own the license for up to, call it 2, 3, 4 years, and then you could potentially sell it at that point? Is there any type of cap or anything around that?
No, I don't. Not to my knowledge. I don't think we're thinking about it in terms of how long you have to hold it to be able to transition it to someone else.
Sure.
But look, a lot of the regulations are going to come out with the Cannabis Control Authority over the next year or so. And so we may see things that we're not even anticipating right now.
Sure. When will the control authority release the full regulations? Any
No
idea when that will
sooner
happen?
than 2022, July 2022, and that's written into the law. And I think what they were working with there is that the commercial aspects of the law need to be reenacted by the 2022 legislature. So that's not going to affect people's possession starting tomorrow, July 1, and their home grow, but it will, and it could affect the what the regulations for the business side looks like. So no sooner than this time next year will we know what those real regulations are. Now, with open hearings and things like that, we may get some inclination of what these regulations could look like, but it's I don't expect to hear anything solid for a while.
Okay. Eric, I want to go back and answer a question that came in during the talk that was addressed during the talk. Maybe we can answer it now live here about the licensing fee. About just understanding there was a comment about $80,000 for the existing program to get in. If you can kind of hit on that, how the new program will be significantly lower because there'll be a lot more licenses and.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think what we were looking at with that comment, and maybe I don't know where we're pulling the information, but right now there are no fees. We don't know what the fees are going to be. The control authority is going to set all that stuff. There were high fees for the pharmaceutical processes. That's the medicinal side. But bear in mind that the medicinal side had 5 licenses. So it was a 5 or 6. Either way, it's extremely limited, and it was fully vertically integrated. We're talking about 850 licenses between cultivation and retail, close to 1,000 total types of licenses when you add in the manufacturing and wholesale. So it's that volume of licenses is going to bring down expected fees and things like that. So I wouldn't expect $80,000, but if we're looking nationwide for averages, it could be anywhere from 10 to it could be up to $100,000, but I just don't anticipate it being that high. But again, that's going to come out from the control authority.
Yeah, but I think you're right. I think you could see that $10,000 mark, give or take 5 or 10 in either direction, really. So we'll have to see. But like you said, with up to 1,000 licenses, they're not going to get rich off the program. The revenue that's generated from that is really to support the program, hire the right people to regulate it, and ensure that it's being managed. It's not like a traditional business to get rich off of the program, and so they're going to budget it properly so that the fees can support it and regulate it and do its job right. So I think that number is probably clear, about 10 to 20 grand probably. So. I have another question here. Does the legalization law already authorize funding for low-cost loans and other financial support for social equity applicants, or is it based on a percentage of cannabis tax revenues realized in the future?
It's a great question. I don't have an amazing answer for you. What the law does is it creates a community reinvestment fund. And through that fund, they're going to be directing a number of social equity initiatives. Some of this is going to go back to the communities for education and things like that. And a lot of that's going to fund the ability to provide no interest loans and things like that. But caveat, the control authority has the authority to say what that's all going to look like. And so I think we're going to be informed over time about that pot of money. But folks who are asking that question and who may qualify, now's the time to really start putting your team together, to be thinking about this thing, and to gather as much intelligence as you can, so that you can be prepared for an application. And by the time we're doing applications, we'll have all those answers, God willing, but we expect.
Okay. I want to reiterate this again. Someone asked this question again. They may have missed it, but when will they release the full regulations? I believe you said 2022 of July.
Yeah, that's no sooner than July of 2022. We're not going to see anything for the next year. I don't expect. but that by law they're not going to release it before then.
Okay. Eric, so we've got a couple years where this program is really going to be in motion. What is your role in really trying to support the Virginia clientele trying to get into the space, and just in between now and then, because we do have a big gap? So what are you looking to do to help just be that voice and listen and support where you can?
Look, I think it's important that people know who's in the space right now, who's working on these issues, who's studying it. If you're the person right now who says, you know what, I think this is me. I think I could open up a retail store. I want to gather my facts and things like that. Start doing that. Do your homework now. Build your team. Work with an attorney or a consultant who fits what your needs are, and just start thinking smartly about that. Because remember, all these caps and all the density issues with a particular community, that's the big picture. There's only one moment in time to be that first applicant, that front wave of applicants. And if you have a competitive application on the front end, you stand a better chance, reasonably, to get that license compared to 4 years from now, when the market's more saturated, or things have changed on a federal level or anything like that. So the folks who get in first, I think, are going to have the best opportunity at market share, et cetera.
Okay. Before we wrap it up here, I had one last question that came in. See if you can help me hit this one. So it says, I heard the JLARC recommended size-based classifications for cultivators. Any comments for us planning on having smaller?
Well, I think that is one of the main concerns. What JLARC was really talking about was there's, and to the best of my recollection, that on the cultivation license side, they set it up in two types, one THC and one that could be still industrial hemp. And so the concern was that they may be diluting the amount of THC-based cultivation licenses with a plant type that doesn't require a license at all. Right now, you can go get an industrial hemp permit, essentially, and you can do that without a license. And it's a different crop and a different plant. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but to my recollection, I don't recall specific sizes for classification. But if you follow up with me after this, I can get that answered for you.
Okay, Eric, any closing remarks here?
This is an exciting time. Ellis, as you know, you've got to watch various markets emerge. Colorado, I think, was the second state to legalize recreational. So I know that it's been fun to watch from your end. I think Virginians and people that want to be in our market really should be excited. There's just so many opportunities to participate. We're still early on, but we should be paying attention to what's happening so that we can have the best market possible. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about it. So thank you.
You bet. Well, this was a great opportunity to really explore the Virginia market and really help kind of arm our audience with what to expect and what to see. And so whether you work with myself or Eric or other consultants or legal firms, please align yourself with the right folks to help you navigate this process. I can't express that enough. So I want to thank our sponsors, Cannabis Tech, for helping support this today. And yes, thank you, Eric, for joining. Anything else you want to add?
Go Virginia Cannabis. Let's see what happens.
I love it. I'm Ellis Smith with American Cannabis. Eric Pastel with Parliatory Law. Thanks again. And if you want to tune in and listen to this later, you can find this on Cannabis Tech. So please pass this around to your friends and colleagues, as we love to share our message. Have a great day.